Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery had nothing to do with madness. It wasn't about psychosis or delusion. It was about a rare kind of person. Those who see everything others overlook, and the crushing cost of carrying that gift. In his clinical work, Jung encountered individuals with what he called differentiated perception. These people weren't ordinary observers. They read the tiniest twitch of a mouth, sensed emotions no one admitted, and recognized patterns in human behavior that everyone else missed. They pierced through masks instantly. They spotted lies without effort. They walked into a room and felt the unspoken tension pressing against the walls. And for them, this wasn't a blessing. It was a burden. Jung warned that such heightened awareness often destroys a life from the inside out. Not because the individuals are unstable, but because the world isn't built for eyes that sharp. They end up isolated, exhausted, unable to belong in the simple flow of social life. The case that revealed this to Jung came to him in 1913, during the darkest year of his own personal crisis after breaking with Freud. A woman, intensely introverted and powerfully intuitive, walked into his practice. Jung described her as possessing what he would later call undifferentiated intuitive perception. She could step into any room and know, almost immediately, who was lying, who was secretly broken, who carried resentment like a shadow clinging to their skin. She didn't hear confessions. She didn't gather evidence. She just knew. And yet, the ability tormented her. She couldn't bear small talk because every conversation felt like theater. She couldn't hold friendships because people felt exposed in her presence, as though she could see into their private journals. She couldn't keep a job because she disrupted the invisible agreements groups rely on to function. Those silent pacts to ignore what's too raw to admit. Jung realized she wasn't sick. She wasn't delusional. She wasn't unstable. She was proof of what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious. When perception sharpens so much, it cuts through the illusions that make ordinary life possible. Her observations were uncanny, almost frightening in their accuracy. Jung checked them again and again, and found them correct. What he was witnessing was not madness, but a consciousness advanced to the point of being socially dangerous. Jung began to study this phenomenon, linking it to what he called participation mystique, a state where highly intuitive individuals absorb not just spoken words, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of everyone around them. In his private notes, he wrote, "There are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the unconscious contents of their environment." Later research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive people would confirm pieces of this truth, showing that about 20% of humanity experiences heightened sensitivity. But Jung was pointing to something even rarer. Within his typology, he identified the introverted intuitive type, barely 1% of the population, who don't just feel deeply, but see patterns buried in the unconscious with piercing clarity. These people notice the sadness behind forced laughter. They sense desperation behind polished speeches. They feel the heavy shadow in a group that everyone else unconsciously agrees to ignore. But Jung saw the danger wasn't only in perception itself. The real danger was the isolation it created. When one sees clearly what others cannot bear to see, he wrote, one becomes a mirror that society cannot face. And mirrors invite attack. Jung observed this again and again. Those with this gift became scapegoats, blamed for the very problems they merely reflected back. He called it shadow projection. People who refused to face their own hidden darkness lashed out at the person who exposed it. If the intuitive suggested someone seemed troubled, they were accused of being negative. If they named a problem no one else dared touch, they were branded judgmental. Over and over, the same story unfolded, the truth-teller punished for speaking what was already there. This was Jung's dangerous discovery, that to see everything is not to live with clarity, but to live with a weight few can survive. And yet, in that danger, he believed, lay the possibility of transformation. The chance to turn unbearable vision into extraordinary wisdom. Carl Jung came to realize that what he was witnessing was not chance. It was not coincidence. It was the psyche defending itself. In memories, dreams, reflections, he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But, he warned, most people do not take that path. Instead of reflecting, they attack the one who mirrors their shadow. This is what Jung named the scapegoat phenomenon. The highly perceptive person, the one who sees too much, becomes the designated problem in every circle they enter, not because they are disruptive, but because their very presence uncovers truths the group cannot bear to face. Jung observed, the bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. To be such a person is not just to feel misunderstood. It is to feel hunted, targeted by a force that cannot be explained with logic, but is felt in every rejection, every sideways glance, every accusation that comes out of nowhere. And yet, Jung's most unsettling discovery went even deeper. He found that overwhelming perception did not manifest in just one way. It revealed itself through 4 distinct patterns within what he called the introverted intuitive type. Each carried its own unique burden. Type 1, the feeling intuitive. These individuals don't just see the emotions of others. They feel them directly, painfully, in their own bodies. They live in a constant state of emotional contagion, absorbing grief, anger, fear, and longing that isn't even theirs. Jung described them as carrying the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment. For them, there is no boundary. Type 2, the thinking intuitive. This type sees not only what is, but what is coming. They detect the hidden logic of relationships, careers, and lives unraveling long before the collapse becomes visible. They predict outcomes, not by reasoned analysis, but by unconscious pattern recognition. Jung wrote, they perceive the conclusions of unconscious processes long before others can see them. For these individuals, foresight is not a gift, but a weight they cannot set down. Type 3, the sensation intuitive. These are the ones who feel the body as a map of the mind. They detect illness before the first symptom, fatigue before it is admitted, and tension that betrays unspoken emotional pain. Jung called them early warning systems for both psychological and physical disease. They carry the knowledge of suffering that hasn't yet surfaced. Type 4, the pure intuitive, the rarest, and often the most tormented. They see everything, all at once, yet cannot organize or express their perceptions clearly. They live in permanent overwhelm, drowning in a flood of unconscious material, without the psychological structure to contain it. For them, life becomes a blur of insights too vast to bear. Jung believed that understanding which pattern you embody is crucial, because each requires a different path toward what he called integration. But before integration can even begin, One must confront why Jung considered this discovery so dangerous. He warned of 3 specific dangers that threatened both the individual and society itself. Danger 1: disrupting the collective unconscious. Societies, families, and organizations survive on shared illusions. Unspoken agreements about what will and won't be seen. The one who perceives too clearly tears holes in that fabric. By simply existing authentically, they destabilize the group's cohesion. They become a threat to the very glue that holds communities together. Danger 2: psychological isolation. Jung called this the problem of the superior function. What should be a person's greatest strength becomes their heaviest curse. He wrote, "The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it." These individuals become islands of awareness in oceans of unconsciousness. The isolation is not only social, it is existential. They feel as if they inhabit a different reality entirely. Danger 3: identity dissolution. Most perilous of all, Jung found, was the loss of self. Those who absorb too much of the unconscious material of others often lose touch with their own personality. Their psychological boundaries collapse. They confuse what belongs to them with what belongs to everyone else. Jung called this participation mystique, a merging with the collective that threatens total self-erasure. He warned of psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession. This is why Jung's discovery was not merely academic. It was urgent. To see everything is not just to carry a rare gift. It is to walk daily along the edge of exile, madness, and obliteration. And yet, Jung believed, if integrated, that same vision could become not destruction, but transformation. Carl Jung came to understand something critical. If extraordinary perception is not integrated, it destroys. To prevent this, he developed what he called the process of individuation, a path for holding on to your own identity while facing the flood of unconscious contents that rush in from others. Phase 1: recognition and differentiation. The first step, Jung said, is learning to recognize when you're carrying what isn't yours. He called this conscious discrimination. The ability to separate your own inner experience from the material you unconsciously absorb from the people around you. The first task, Jung wrote, is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. His method was simple but demanding. Spend time each day in solitude. Allow the noise of the world to settle so you can hear your own authentic voice again. Only then can you begin to discern what is truly yours. Phase 2: shadow integration. Jung noticed that those who see the shadows in others so clearly often do so because they've yet to face their own. The more fiercely you deny your own potential for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you'll be when you see those same traits reflected outside yourself. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Shadow integration means admitting that every quality you spot in someone else lives inside you too. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you whole. And when you are whole, you can see without judgment, without the bitterness that corrodes relationships. Phase 3: conscious participation. The final stage is what Jung called conscious participation in the collective unconscious. This is the ability to engage with the psychological contents of others without losing your sense of self. The individuated person, he said, acts as a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, helping others become aware of what they've been avoiding, while still protecting their own psychological integrity. To do this, one must develop what Jung called psychological containers. You learn to hold the unconscious material of others, but you never confuse it with your own. Without this skill, superior perception overwhelms and consumes. With it, perception becomes transformative. Lessons from history. Jung studied history to see what happened when extraordinary perception went unintegrated. He looked to Friedrich Nietzsche, a man with devastating clarity of vision, who could see through social, religious, and philosophical facades. But Nietzsche, Jung noted, never learned to integrate his gift. He turned his perception into a weapon, tearing down rather than building up. His brilliance led not to balance, but to collapse. Nietzsche's isolation and eventual breakdown became, for Jung, the warning sign of unintegrated perception. But there were counterexamples. Jung looked to Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic, as proof that superior perception could be transformed. Eckhart possessed a rare mystical intuition, perceiving spiritual realities invisible to most. But unlike Nietzsche, he directed his insights toward compassion. He translated overwhelming clarity into wisdom that could nourish others. His secret, Jung said, was conscious humility. The recognition that perception is a gift to be shared with care, not a weapon to be wielded. Jung's own battle. Jung himself was no stranger to the dangers. From 1913 to 1919, during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, he teetered on the edge of psychosis. In the Red Book, he admitted, "I was menaced by a psychosis and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me." His own extraordinary perception nearly destroyed him until he realized these visions weren't pathological. They were evolutionary. Consciousness trying to grow beyond its old limits. That insight reshaped everything. Jung came to see that for the highly perceptive, survival depends on connection. Isolation is deadly. He spoke of the importance of finding the few who understand. People capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness, without fear or defensiveness. He identified 3 essential kinds of relationships. The first was with fellow individuated people. The individuated person, Jung wrote, recognizes another individuated person immediately. There is a presence, an authenticity, that cannot be fabricated. Such encounters are rare, but when they happen, they bring instant recognition, almost like meeting someone you've known forever. For Jung, the ultimate privilege of a lifetime was this: to become who you truly are. But that privilege cannot be realized alone. It requires being witnessed by others who can see and honor your authenticity. And that, Jung believed, is the difference between being destroyed by extraordinary perception or being transformed by it. Carl Jung believed that survival for the highly perceptive depends on connection, but not just any connection. The right kind. He described 3 types of relationships that could sustain those who see more deeply than others. Type 1, the conscious minority. These are the rare souls Jung called the conscious minority. When you meet them, you recognize each other instantly. With them, you can be fully yourself, with no fear of overwhelming or threatening them. Their presence feels like relief, like coming home. Type 2, fellow travelers. Then there are those actively engaged in their own inner work. Therapy, spiritual practice, the long road of self-discovery. They may not share your heightened perception, but they understand its value. Jung wrote, "Those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others. These are the people who won't flinch when you speak truth." Type 3. Natural containers. Finally, there are those rare individuals who act as vessels. They may not have extraordinary perception themselves, but they have the strength to hold it. Often, they are people who have endured suffering and emerged wiser, steadier, less afraid of contradiction. Jung called them natural containers. People who can listen, absorb, and not shatter. Recognizing safe people. Jung taught that it's possible to identify safe relationships by observing how others respond. Do they ask questions instead of leaping to defend themselves? Can they admit their own contradictions without shame? Do they stay calm when confronted with uncomfortable truths? These, Jung said, are the signs of people who can handle deep perception. He also taught what he called a gradual revelation protocol. Start small. Offer gentle observations and see how the other person reacts. Do they grow curious, or do they become defensive? If curiosity is there, you can go deeper. Always frame your insights as offerings, not pronouncements. The goal isn't to find people who accept everything you say. It's to find those who can engage with your vision as a contribution, not a threat. The purpose of integration. For Jung, integrating superior perception wasn't just about personal survival. It was about the evolution of human consciousness itself. He believed that those who integrate their vision become culture carriers. People who prepare society for truths it isn't yet ready to see. The 4 stages of transformation. Stage 1. Recognition without overwhelm. The journey begins when you can accept your perception without being crushed by it. Jung called this the conscious acceptance of the superior function. The beginning of wisdom, he wrote, is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be. Stage 2. Integration without isolation. Here, you learn to use your gift without losing connection. Jung called this social individuation. Becoming authentically yourself while still engaged with the world. Stage 3. Service without sacrifice. Your perception becomes a gift you offer, not a burden you hide. You participate consciously, helping others without depleting yourself. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole." Stage 4. Legacy without attachment. Finally, you use your perception for the future, not for recognition today. Jung called this the transcendent function. The individuated person contributes to humanity's growth without clinging to whether their gift is seen or rewarded. Integration becomes, in his words, cultural medicine. The pitfalls along the way. But Jung also warned of dangers that derail the process. The most common is what he called inflation. When people begin to identify with their gift, they fall into what Jung described as the prophet complex. They believe it's their job to save everyone from unconsciousness. This leads to preaching, judgment, and, inevitably, isolation. He cautioned, the moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand. The larger vision. For Jung, the integration of superior perception was never just about the individual. It was about humanity's future. He wrote, What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. The task of the perceptive individual is to bring hidden truths into awareness before they erupt destructively in society. This, Jung believed, was the great calling of the conscious minority: to see, to integrate, and to serve. Not only for their own survival, but for the unfolding of human consciousness itself. Carl Jung saw that the path of integration is fragile. Even those with extraordinary perception can stumble into traps that twist their gift into something destructive. He documented these pitfalls with stark honesty, knowing that recognizing them was the only way to avoid them. Pitfall 1: withdrawal, disguised as wisdom. Some individuals, overwhelmed by what they perceive, retreat from the world. They convince themselves that others are too unconscious to be worth their time. To them, isolation feels like transcendence. But Jung cut through the illusion. True individuation, he wrote, requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it. Pitfall 2: becoming the helper. Others fall into the opposite trap, defining themselves entirely by how much they can help. They become addicted to being needed. Their identity collapses into their function, and they disappear behind it. Jung warned, when perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite: the sacrifice of personality to role. Pitfall 3: the overwhelm return. Even those who achieve integration are not safe forever. Stress, trauma, or life transitions can undo progress. Boundaries collapse, and they find themselves flooded once again by the unconscious contents of others. Jung reminded his patients, integration is not a permanent achievement, but a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. Practices for ongoing integration. To remain whole, Jung taught daily practices: solitude to separate your voice from what you've absorbed, conscious choices about when and with whom to use your perceptive abilities, ongoing shadow work to prevent projection, supportive relationships that can check your reality, and creative expression as a release valve for overwhelming input. The integrated person does not achieve perfection, Jung wrote, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity. The larger role of the perceptive individual. Jung saw superior perception not just as a private burden, but as an evolutionary function. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, the individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society. Those who integrate their gift become pioneers of consciousness, advancing into psychological territories that the collective will one day need to enter. Throughout history, such individuals appeared before their time. Scouts sensing what humanity wasn't ready to face. What appears in the individual, first as psychological insight, Jung wrote, later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. Modern manifestations. In our era, Jung believed, highly perceptive individuals may already be sensing the psychological roots of social and environmental breakdowns, the possibilities of spiritual frameworks beyond traditional religion, the shadows behind unchecked technology, or the collective patterns that must be integrated before they erupt in destructive ways. The sensitive ones feel the tremors first. Their symptoms often mirror what the entire culture resists confronting: service without martyrdom. But Jung's great insight was this: the gift does not demand martyrdom. The purpose is not to suffer for perception, but to serve with it. The individuated person serves the collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. The ultimate integration. At the highest stage, Jung observed, the perceptive individual holds their gift lightly. They see clearly without clinging, feel deeply without being compelled to fix everything, and embody consciousness without forcing it on others. This is the transcendent function. To serve evolution naturally, not through preaching, but through presence. The patient who transformed Jung never forgot his patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who arrived during his own crisis. After years of working through the individuation process, her life changed. She learned to separate what was hers from what she absorbed. She found meaningful work as a counselor, using her vision to help others. She built relationships with those who valued her perception instead of fearing it. And most of all, she stopped seeing her sensitivity as a curse and began to treat it as a gift that required care and consciousness. Jung wrote of her transformation. She learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. This, Jung believed, was his most dangerous discovery, that some individuals are born with consciousness ahead of its time. Their perception will either destroy them or transform them into what humanity most needs. If you carry such a gift, it is not a flaw. It is not a malfunction. It is, as Jung said, an advanced feature of consciousness itself, waiting to be integrated and waiting to serve. You're not broken because you notice what others can't. You're not weak. You're not fragile. You're simply ahead of your time. The real question isn't whether you should bury your gift just to blend in with the collective unconscious. The real question is whether you'll choose to develop the skills needed to carry that gift wisely. Carl Jung's process of individuation was created for exactly this. It's the path from isolation to connection, from overwhelm to wisdom. It's the way perception transforms from a curse you can't control into a contribution the world desperately needs. You were born with this vision for a reason, not to suffer in silence, not to drown in what you see, but to serve the evolution of human consciousness. The world needs your insight, but it needs it delivered with balance, clarity, and strength. Integration is what turns dangerous perception into cultural medicine. Your gift is not the burden. The burden is living unconsciously with it. When you integrate your perception, you become what Jung called a pioneer of consciousness. Someone carrying truths that humanity is not yet ready to face, but one day will have to. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't that some people see everything. It was that most never learn to use what they see with wisdom. The danger lies not in your vision, but in failing to create a conscious relationship with it. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what this moment in evolution requires. Once you learn to hold your perception with strength instead of fear, you'll see what Jung saw. The danger of seeing everything isn't the vision itself. It's never learning how to wield it. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, know this: you're not alone. You are part of a rare group that Jung believed essential for the next stage of human development. Your journey matters. And the world is waiting for you to live it, not in hiding, but in integration.